16 people survived 72 days in the Andes Mountains by making a choice that haunts them to this day. They ate the frozen bodies of their dead friends to stay alive. This happened in 1972, and survival experts still debate whether they were heroes who did what was necessary or whether some line should never be crossed. Before we dive in, have you ever faced a situation where all your options were terrible? Drop survive in the comments if you've had to make a choice between bad and worse just to keep going. Because what happened to these rugby players will test everything you think you know about human morality and the will to live. Picture this. 45 young men on their way to a rugby match in Chile. Their plane crashes in the Andes at 11,500 feet. No rescue comes. Food runs out in days. Temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Then they make a discovery that changes everything. But it requires crossing a line that civilization says should never be crossed. But here's the question that will torment you. If you were starving to death in the mountains, surrounded by the frozen bodies of your friends, would you do whatever it takes to survive, or would you rather die with your morals intact? Keep watching, because these 16 survivors had to answer that question, and their choice shocked the world. October 13, 1972. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 carried 45 people, mostly members of a rugby team from Montevideo and their friends and family, on what should have been a routine flight to Santiago, Chile for a match. The passengers were young, optimistic, and excited about their trip. Most were college students in their late teens and early 20s. They joked, played cards, and looked forward to the game ahead. Roberto Canessa, 19, a medical student, sat with his rugby teammates discussing their chances in the upcoming match. Nando Pardu, 22, was excited to explore Chile with his mother and sister, who were also on the flight. Antonio Tintin Vicentin, 18, was making his first trip outside Uruguay. None of them imagined they were about to face the most extreme survival situation in recorded history. At 3:21 p.m., the plane encountered severe turbulence while crossing the Andes. The pilot, confused by cloud cover and poor visibility, began descending too early, thinking they'd already crossed a mountain range. Flight 571 slammed into an unnamed peak at 11,500 feet altitude. The impact tore off the wings and tail section. The fuselage, containing survivors, slid down the mountainside before coming to rest in a snow-filled valley. When the chaos settled, 12 people were dead, including Nando's mother and sister. The remaining 33 survivors found themselves stranded in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, the high Andes in the middle of winter. The survivors quickly realized the magnitude of their situation. 11,500 feet. Oxygen levels were dangerously low. Daytime highs around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Nighttime lows of minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Completely isolated, no roads or settlements for hundreds of miles. Limited food, no winter clothing, minimal medical supplies. The radio was destroyed in the crash. The plane's emergency food supply, chocolate, crackers, and wine, would last maybe a week if carefully rationed among 33 people. Pause. Imagine being stranded in sub-zero temperatures with no rescue in sight and food for only a few days. What would be your first priority? How long do you think you could psychologically handle such a situation? Share your thoughts below. For the first 8 days, the survivors maintained hope that rescue teams would find them. They could hear planes flying overhead during search operations. But on October 21st, day 8, they heard devastating news on a small transistor radio they had managed to repair. The search for the Uruguayan aircraft has been suspended. The passengers are presumed dead. The psychological impact was crushing. The outside world had given up on them. No one was coming to save them. They were completely on their own in an environment that seemed designed to kill them. Several survivors broke down completely. Others talked about giving up and accepting death rather than continuing to suffer. By day 10, the meager food supplies were exhausted. The survivors began eating leather from luggage, but it provided no real nutrition. Some tried to eat grass and roots found on the snow, but these made them violently ill. Starvation began in earnest. In the extreme cold and high altitude, their bodies were burning massive calories just to stay warm. Without food, they would die within weeks. The math was simple and terrifying. No food meant certain death for all 33 remaining survivors. It was Roberto Canessa, the medical student, who first voiced what some had been thinking, but none dared say. "We have protein here," he said quietly, looking at the frozen bodies of their friends preserved in the snow. The suggestion horrified most of the survivors. These weren't anonymous victims. They were friends, teammates, people they had known for years. The idea of consuming human flesh violated every moral, religious, and cultural value they held. "We can't do that," several survivors protested. "We're not animals. We're civilized people." "If we don't," Canessa replied, "we're all going to die here." For days, the survivors debated the unthinkable choice. The argument split along several lines. It violated religious principles. Most were Catholic. It was fundamentally inhuman and morally wrong. They couldn't desecrate their friends' bodies. It was better to die with dignity than live with such shame. Survival was a paramount moral duty. The dead would want their friends to live. They weren't killing anyone. They were already dead. God would forgive them for choosing life. As starvation progressed and survivors grew weaker, the debate became more desperate. On day 11, facing imminent death from starvation, the survivors made their choice. They would cross the line that civilization had drawn and do what was necessary to survive. The decision wasn't unanimous, but it was final. Those who couldn't bring themselves to participate would still benefit from the strength of those who could. They established rules to maintain their humanity. Only flesh from those already dead would be used. It would be cut and prepared away from the main group. They would pray before each meal. No one would be forced to participate directly. Roberto Canessa, with his medical knowledge, took on the task of preparing the flesh. "If I have to do this to save our lives," he said, "then I will do it." Pause. This is one of the most extreme moral dilemmas imaginable. Do you think they made the right choice? Could you have done the same thing? What do you think separates survival from savagery? Share your perspective in the comments. Consuming human flesh kept the survivors alive, but it came with devastating psychological costs. Many suffered from overwhelming guilt and shame, nightmares and hallucinations, religious crises and spiritual torment, fear of what they were becoming. Some survivors couldn't bring themselves to eat, even as they grew weaker. Others ate, but vomited from the psychological revulsion. A few tried to rationalize it as communion, taking their friends into themselves to keep their memory alive. The act of survival had changed them in ways they couldn't have imagined. On day 17, just as the survivors were adapting to their new reality, disaster struck again. An avalanche buried the aircraft fuselage, while most of the survivors were sleeping inside. The snow filled the cabin in seconds, trapping everyone in complete darkness. 8 more people died from suffocation, including several who had been among the strongest survivors. Now, only 19 people remain alive, and they were trapped under tons of snow with even less space and resources than before. After 60 days in the mountains, it became clear that rescue wasn't coming. If they were going to survive, they would have to save themselves. 3 of the strongest survivors, Nando Pardue, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, decided to attempt the impossible, hiking out of the Andes to find help. They had no proper equipment, no maps, no mountaineering experience, and no idea how far they would have to travel. But staying meant certain death for everyone. On day 61, the 3 men began their desperate trek across some of the world's most dangerous terrain. They carried makeshift equipment, including human flesh for sustenance during the journey. After 3 days of hiking, Vizintin turned back, recognizing he wasn't strong enough for the full journey. Pardue and Canessa continued alone. For 10 more days, they climbed peaks over 15,000 feet high, crossed glaciers, and navigated treacherous terrain that would challenge expert mountaineers. They were fueled by nothing but determination and the knowledge that their friends' lives depended on them. On day 70, Pardue and Canessa finally encountered a Chilean shepherd named Sergio Catalan. Through gestures and a note written on paper, they communicated their desperate situation. "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains," Pardue wrote. "I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. We have 14 injured people. We are trying to find someone to help us. Catalan immediately contacted authorities. 2 days later, on December 22nd, day 72, helicopters finally reached the crash site and rescued the remaining 14 survivors. When the story broke globally, the world was divided in its reaction. Some saw them as heroes. They survived impossible conditions through determination. They made necessary choices to preserve life. They showed incredible courage and teamwork. They violated fundamental human taboos. They crossed moral lines that should never be crossed. They became something less than human to survive. The survivors themselves struggled with their actions for decades. In interviews years later, they expressed no regret about surviving. They all agreed they would make the same choice again. Deep trauma. Many required years of therapy to cope with what they had done. Spiritual growth. Several found deeper religious faith through their ordeal. Perspective on life. All reported profound appreciation for simply being alive. We did what we had to do to survive. Roberto Canessa said decades later, I won't apologize for being alive. Survival experts and medical professionals generally support the survivor's choice. Without protein, they would have died within weeks. The guilt was punishment enough for their actions. Normal moral rules don't apply in extreme survival situations. Similar choices have been made in other extreme survival situations throughout history. The Andes survival story raises profound questions that have no easy answers. Where do we draw the line between survival and savagery? Do normal moral rules apply in life or death situations? Is preserving life always the highest moral good? How far would you go to survive? In our comfortable modern world, it's easy to judge the survivor's choice. But their story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and survival. We all have a capacity for actions we never thought possible. Extreme situations reveal who we really are under civilized facades. The will to live can overcome almost any moral boundary. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. Today, the 16 survivors, several have died of natural causes in the decade since, are mostly living quiet, normal lives. Most became successful professionals, doctors, lawyers, businessmen. They married, had children, and contributed to their communities. But they never forgot the 29 friends who died in the mountains, or the choice that saved their lives but haunted their dreams. The crash site in the Andes remains unmarked and largely inaccessible. The mountain keeps its secrets, and the bones of those who didn't survive rest in eternal snow. Final challenge. The Andes survivors face the ultimate test of human will versus human morality. Their choice kept them alive but changed them forever. What would you have done? Share this story with someone who needs to understand that sometimes survival requires crossing lines we never thought we would cross. That's the story of 72 days that tested the limits of human endurance and redefined the meaning of doing whatever it takes to survive. The mountain claimed 29 lives, but it couldn't break the will of 16 people who chose life over death, no matter the cost. If this story made you question what you would do in an impossible situation, drop survival in the comments and subscribe for more incredible true stories that test the limits of human endurance and moral choice.